So everybody's watching the news right now today, and we know that there's a Delta variant, and we're in really, really bad shape, and like the pandemic is raging on, and it's worse than it's ever been. We're right back where we started. We're worse than where we started. We need to get back to masks. We need to get back to vaccinating everybody, shutting down everything again. I mean, it's just scary stuff that's going on right now. I'm going to go through with you right now the three things that you need to know about what's going on and this Delta variant and the virus in general. To get right into it, the first thing that we're going to talk about is we are not in a pandemic anymore. We're going to go through the definitions here. So what makes it a pandemic? A pandemic is just a word that get thrown around. They start out with an outbreak becomes an epidemic, and an epidemic spaced out over different land masses, different countries. That is what becomes a pandemic. So the word is just kind of thrown around right there, but we know we're in the worst pandemic in history and all that kind of stuff. So I'll go with you some details. What do they call an epidemic? Where does it come from? So according to the CDC, I'm going to relate this to the flu, basically. They call the flu, and they lump the flu, pneumonia and influenza. And there's a threshold, what they call the epidemic threshold. So how do we know we're in an epidemic? There's a threshold. They use the number of deaths, the percent of people who are dying. So they said that this is from Infectious Disease News. This is, I'll read it to you, I'll show it to you. CDC reports pneumonia influenza mortality hits epidemic threshold. This was February 10th, 2017. They said data showed that 7.4% of deaths were caused by pneumonia or influenza, exceeding the 7.3% epidemic threshold based on the National Center for Health and Statistics mortality surveillance system. So 7.3 epidemic threshold, 7.3% of deaths caused by pneumonia and influenza. Anything over that, that's the epidemic threshold. We can now call it an epidemic. Now, COVID's a little bit different. What they've done now is they've taken influenza and pneumonia and they've added in COVID. So P for pneumonia, I for influenza, and now C for COVID. And they're using a different measurement now because they're just adding COVID on top of the pneumonia and the influenza. So if we're going to use that 7.3, it's not really going to work anymore because we're adding on top of it. We didn't take away influenza and pneumonia. So to add on top of it, they're doing more. So they use a standard deviation. It's like 1.645 from the normal. Gets very, very complex, very complicated. But let's just stick with that 7.3% epidemic threshold. Okay, so anything over that, we're in an epidemic. And that's just for influenza and for pneumonia. So this is a chart. I printed this up today. This is the percentage of deaths due to pneumonia, influenza, and COVID. This is the national summary, okay? So right there, they have a baseline. That's what the black line is. And then the red line is the pneumonia, influenza, and COVID, the deaths. So right here, this was back in the early part of 2019, 2020, where everything took off, everything went up. And these are the percentage of deaths, boom, boom, boom. That's the tracking from here to here, okay? So always, it was just normal, boom, spike reel up here like that. Right now, the most recent, this was July 10th, 2021, the week of July 10th through July 17th. We are now at a 6.9%, 6.9% of deaths now. So you can see this trend, it's just going lower and lower and lower. We're at 6.9%. The epidemic threshold was 7.3%. So according to this, we're not even in an epidemic anymore. And if we're not in an epidemic, we're not in a pandemic, okay? So it's over. I mean, this stuff is done, 6.9%. It doesn't mean people aren't dying, but it means it's not a huge deal like the news is telling you. The epidemic is now below the epidemic threshold, 6.9%. So why are you still seeing it in the news? Why is it still being called pandemic and the worst thing ever? You need the pandemic word because you need the emergency. You need the emergency because the vaccine is an emergency use authorization. Without the emergency, you can't use the vaccine. It's not FDA approved. It's emergency use authorization. So you need a pandemic to keep that going. And if we're at 6.9%, we're not at an epidemic, so we're not at a pandemic. But you're not going to see that on the news. So right there, we're not in a pandemic anymore. So we don't need to be afraid of the pandemic anymore. But people are dying. People are still going on. Like all that stuff's going on. That's true, but it's not nearly what is being made out in the news. The second thing you're going to hear is that this mutation, the Delta variant, this is the worst mutation. This is so much more viral and people are dying so much more and all that kind of stuff. I'll do a whole nother video just based on that. But I'm going to tell you this. living organisms mutate for one of two reasons, right? They're going to mutate because it's advantageous for them. So think like a giraffe. A giraffe grew that real long neck so it can eat food. That's a mutation, and that happened over millions and millions and millions of years. So you mutate because it's advantageous, or you're going to mutate because there's a threat. You're going to mutate for protection. And a virus is an organism. It's considered, to some degree, a living organism. So if it's mutating and it's mutating fast, it's mutating because there's some kind of threat. And I'm going to tell you this, just to keep it simple, a threat to a virus is not an unvaccinated person. I know the TV's telling you that. An unvaccinated person was unvaccinated 6 months ago too. It's no new threat. The only new threat that's coming out is what we're doing to try to treat this virus, try to attack this virus. The virus is under attack. It's going to mutate to protect itself. So any mutation that's going on, just using logic, it's not because of the unvaccinated. It's because of what we're doing. We're forcing this mass protocol and vaccinating everybody left and right. And we're causing this thing to mutate. So if it's mutating, that's why it's mutating, not because people aren't vaccinated. So that's number two. We're not in a pandemic. Things aren't mutating because people aren't vaccinated. And then number three, people are dying. Okay. So you see it on the news, the big push right now is 95% of people going to hospitals are unvaccinated, and 90% of the people dying are unvaccinated. So people are dying, hospitals are filling back up again, all this stuff's going on. We need to be really, really scared. So again, we can look at data, we can look at statistics. So this, and I'll go through with you, this is a graph that shows the daily deaths. So the daily deaths from coronavirus. This starts in October 2020. This is July 2021. Boom, 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 boom. You just got the numbers here on the side. So here, at its height, 3,300 people per day. So each one of these, this is per day when they were going. And then it trended down. We're down here, and this is January, this is February, trending down. We're going, I mean, you see this trend, people are dying way, way, way less. I mean, it's just not this big, huge thing anymore. But right here, this is the most recent one right here. This number was 243 people a day. So at the most recent count, 243 people a day are dying. 243 people dead is tragic, but this is not emergency shut down the world because 243 people a day are dying. So I'm going to tell you that 90% of the people unvaccinated have 100% of those 243 people have what you call comorbidities. Comorbidities are what's killing people, not coronavirus. So I'll show you what that means. 243 people dying per day. And the news will have you think that the whole world needs to shut down again. This is from the American Heart Association. This is the American Diabetic Association. This is the American Cancer Society. So comorbidities, diabetes, obesity, that's a comorbidity. In 2017, diabetes was mentioned as a cause of death in a total of 270,702 certificates. So in 2017, 270,000 people died from diabetes, complications of diabetes, right? 270,000 divided by 365 a day, that's 742 people a day. So in 2017, 742 people died every single day from diabetes. 243 people are dying from COVID. 742, that's 3 times. You have 3 times more chance of dying from diabetes than you do from COVID. Cancer. 606,520 deaths in the year 2020, which is about 1,600 deaths per day. 1,600 deaths per day, every day. 1,600 people every single day. 243 from COVID, 1,600. That's 6.5 times. That's 650% greater chance of dying from cancer than you do from dying from COVID. 243 people pales. And then the big one, American Heart Association. On the average, someone dies of coronary vascular disease every 36 seconds. There are 2,380 deaths from CVD each day based on 2018 data. That number goes up. 2,380. 2,380 people die every single day. That is 9.8 times as many people as are dying from COVID right now. You're scared of leaving your house. You got your double masks on. You need to get your vaccine. You're afraid of your neighbors, all this stuff. You have 9.8. That's almost 1,000 times more of a chance of dying from heart disease than you do from COVID. So while you're masking up and you're washing your hands all the time, but what are you doing every day? What are you eating every day? What are you thinking every day? I mean, if you're in line at McDonald's and you're eating fast food, you have 1,000% higher chance of dying from that than you do of COVID. And we're all worried because the TV can manipulate these numbers. You're going to see it on TV, Delta variant, everybody needs to be afraid. The data doesn't show that. 2,380 people die every day, and that's 2018. That's been going on every day for years and years and years. And 243 people died of COVID, but the world's still shut down. You guys, it's over. The pandemic's over. Mutations aren't caused by unvaccinated people. It's because we're aggressively attacking this virus. And the rate of deaths, the comorbidities kill people, not COVID. 243 people a day. We are out of this. Just turn off the TV and get back to your life.